Across nearly a century of film, many animation studios have kickstarted decades of success thanks to a single big risk that paid off and bankrolled a stream of new movies. But every animated movie is a risk to some degree, needing years and years of work to bring stories to life frame by frame, often undergoing massive changes mid-production and needing new innovations to bring their visions to life. But not every gamble pays off. And few animated failures are as big as the disaster that is 2001's Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Springing to life from the mind of Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, The Spirits Within represented both a bold new direction for video game studio Square and a huge leap forward for film animation with its innovations in motion capture technology. In fact, Square bet so big on the success of The Spirits Within that they created a whole new subdivision, Square Pictures, to make the film themselves instead of selling the rights to another studio. Massive hype, the promise of changing film forever, and hundreds of millions of dollars were sunk into the creation of The Spirits Within. But only a few years later, and not only was Square Pictures gone forever, but Square itself as it had existed was no more. So what went wrong? And what would have happened if things had gone right? This is the story of Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, an animated disaster. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within makes the bold decision to not be related to any Final Fantasy game whatsoever, and instead takes place in 2065 on a post-apocalyptic Earth that's been ravaged by the arrival of alien phantom creatures. Any contact with these floating spirits consumes the soul of a living being. And while remnants of humanity exist in futuristic barrier cities, the phantoms are close to wiping out all life. The only hope is scientist Dr. Aki Ross and her former love interest Captain Gray Edwards, who race against time to create a spiritual weapon that will stop the phantoms. But before we get any further, let's talk about the Final Fantasy video game series and its creators Square for a few minutes. The first ever Final Fantasy was released in 1987 for the NES, and was created by Hironobu Sakaguchi for Japanese video game developer Square. And while FF wasn't the first ever role-playing video game, its success paved the way for not only many more games within the genre, but a nearly 40-year-long franchise, with Final Fantasy continuing on in 16 main games and many more sub-series within the brand. But while these games share certain themes, combat systems, and recurring creatures, Final Fantasy is an anthology series composed of standalone games all taking place in vastly different worlds and times. Afterward, Sakaguchi would act as story director on Final Fantasy 3, 4, and 5, producer on Final Fantasy 6, 7, and 9, and executive producer on Final Fantasy 8, 10, 10-2, and 11, as well as working on many other projects with Square, as FF became the backbone of the once financially struggling game company. 7 in particular saw the company take their CGI cutscenes to a new level, and so with the company riding high, Square decided to push into multimedia ventures, and the first would use their biggest franchise, Final Fantasy, for a massive launch, with Sakaguchi at the helm. According to the creator, the origins of this new movie began shortly after the death of his mother Aki, which our main character would also be named, as Sakaguchi wondered what would happen to the human spirit after death. This would lead to the Gaia theory, an idea that all spirits would return to the larger spirit of the Earth after death. That idea would inform a lot of Final Fantasy VII's plot, but it's also the driving force behind the plot of The Spirits Within. As part of the process of developing the film and Square's larger ambitions, the company built a brand new studio for Square Pictures in Honolulu, Hawaii. A very expensive piece of real estate and a location chosen to bridge the gap between Japan and Los Angeles. With producers Chris Lee and Jun Aida brought on board, Square Pictures began recruiting animators from both locations, filling out their ranks and getting to work on a film that Sakaguchi wanted to look as realistic as possible. There are still many hurdles in the production of CG, said Sakaguchi at the time of production. To overcome these hurdles and to make people feel emotion with its projection is what we're aiming to achieve in making this movie. Perhaps there will be in this character and expressions that isn't felt in today's CG. In the end, I want to merge this with games. I want to make a game so good that if I taped it and showed it to someone, that person will feel moved. achieved. But first, we must perfect the technologies of CG projection. With Sakaguchi pursuing a new level of CG, The Spirits Within became the first ever feature film to fully utilize motion capture technology. The process was pioneered by Remington Scott and Michael Riedel in the late 80s and first put to use in the video game Micro League Wrestling, before becoming famous with Acclaim's Mortal Kombat. And over the course of the 90s, CGI animation was popularized on film, with The Phantom Menace's Jar Jar Binks being the biggest character at the time, made possible with motion capture. Then, in the late 90s, Sakaguchi got in contact with Scott saying he didn't want it to be a cartoon like everyone else was creating. He wanted it to have real emotional characters that were physically real and looked as real as possible. By the time Scott came to Square's headquarters in Hawaii, they had already been working on The Spirits Within for more than a year, with very little actually produced. Soon after, the American animation team that was at odds with Sakaguchi was let go, and Scott took over, focusing on making the characters' body movements and facial expressions as well-mapped and closely detailed as possible. Essentially, Scott was just as important to shooting the film as Sakaguchi was. The process had Sakaguchi and concept artists storyboard the scenes, which the mocap team then turned into a 3D animatic as proof of concept. Sakaguchi then approved it and had Scott shoot the motion capture and work with the actors. The results went to animators who then refined the facial animations, lighting, and composition to create the final image. By the time the film was set for its premiere, The Spirits Within had been in development for 4 years, far surpassing its planned $76 million budget, with 200 people working on the film to create 1,327 shots and 141,964 frames of animation. With so much time and money put into the motion capture work, Square and distributor Sony Pictures went heavy on the marketing, with tons and tons of articles hyping up just how game-changing The Spirits Within would become. And at the center of all that marketing was the character of Aki Ross. I'll talk more about the weakness this causes later, but while Aki Ross is voiced by Ming-Na Wen, the motion capture was done by Tori Elridge, with Aki as a creation owned outright by Square. The company touted Ross as the actress of the future, a fully defined digital person that would be her own movie star, and return as an actress in future films. She was also given a bikini photo shoot in Maxim magazine. I've ruined my search history for this video, and her digital body flaunted for thousands of horny nerds. A strange approach to marketing your film, but one that went along with Square's attempt to place their character on the same level as any flesh and blood actress. Alongside its bigger budget and bigger ambitions, The Spirits Within has an all-star cast that voices its motion capture characters. Alongside Wen is Alec Baldwin as Captain Gray Edwards, Donald Sutherland as Dr. Sid, and the rest of the cast rounded out by James Woods, Steve Buscemi, Ving Rhames, and Roz from Frasier. However, none of the voice actors acted out the motion capture bringing their characters to life. And I think having no direct connection between the bodies and voices of these characters is a big mistake.
I told her everything had a spirit. Dogs, cats, trees, little girls, even the earth.
Not only does the film have difficulty consistently lining up voices and mouths, but there's an uncanniness that comes from a strange body that doesn't actually resemble anyone, and a disconnected voice working in tandem with it. You can't necessarily pin it down when watching it, but your brain notices it. The result is human-like characters that simply can't get out of the uncanny valley. So what makes The Spirits Within a Final Fantasy story? Well, not really anything, but there are a few shared ideas that cross over with the games. A lot of Spirits Within's story deals with the Earth's Gaia, here the spirit of the Earth that all living things come from and return to in death. The alien phantoms are a product of their own world's Gaia, and are drawn to feed on ours as Aki tries to save our homeworld spirit from the invasion. There are many different uses of the Gaia name throughout the game series, but it usually evokes the Greek mythological personification of the Earth. There's a Sid character here, as there is in every FF game. Here, a wise old doctor that mentors Aki and helps to engineer the cure to the Phantoms. And this one's a little broad, but the story is all about a group of heroes saving the Earth from a larger mythical threat in the midst of a conflict between different human factions. And really, that's about it. And with the film not adapting an existing game, and Square never creating a game adaptation of the movie, this film seems more and more baffling as the years go on. There are two major faults with Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. how its cutting-edge technology fails to create a well-animated movie, and how its story simply does not work. Okay, so yeah, that's basically everything. Oh, and the voice acting is pretty weak, the editing is slack, the themes are shallow, and the world design is very bland. So yeah, definitely everything, but let's get into the why of all that. There's no doubt that Square's movie represented a massive new development in film technology for the time. In fact, motion capture, and specifically the idea of a studio-owned digital actor, was so controversial at the time that even people like Tom Hanks, who would later star in the motion capture-propelled and accidentally nightmarish Polar Express, openly talked about the film as a threat to working actors. Looking at the film now, you can see just how dated the technology is. But even at the time, this didn't really work. I think that the overall animation failures of The Spirits Within can be explained by looking at the other CGI animated films that were released around the same time. At Pixar, A Bug's Life was released in 1998, Toy Story 2 in 1999, and Monsters, Inc. in 2001. At DreamWorks, Ants was released in 1998, Shrek in 2001, and Shrek 2 in 2004. Elsewhere, Dinosaur was released in 2000, Barbie in the Nutcracker in 2001, and Ice Age in 2002. And you might notice a trend between all those films. There are no photorealistic human characters involved. Even in Toy Story 2 and Shrek, humans are done in a much more cartoonish way. And everything else is a toy or a bug or a monster. That's a smart choice. That's why Pixar's first feature film starred toys. If you can't make something not look like plastic, then use characters that are actually made out of plastic. But The Spirits Within stars human characters wearing normal clothes and moving like real people, all created from photo references. Obviously, the entire team was working hard to make their characters into fully expressive people with minute details. But boy howdy, just look at Aki's hair moving all around and you can see just how far they still had to go. There are, however, some moments where these characters look pretty good. Mostly that's down to specific moments and shots with just the right angle and just the right light, often moving and reacting as little as possible. That's not to say that The Spirits Within's graphics are terrible, but that they're the product of a film production's reach that far exceeds its grasp. The entire film's approach is to shoot and treat its human characters like real-life actors, for a believable cast doing things that actual actors could basically all do in live action already. I would say that 90% of everything done by the characters in this film could be done by a human actor on a set. And without extraordinary circumstances made possible by having characters and locations do things that are impossible in real life, you begin to wonder why this film was made in the first place. Aside from the CGI simply not being able to craft believable characters, or handle the detailed graphics needed for the world, the actual designs of everything are just so boring. I know this is a post-apocalyptic world, but the fact that everything is beige, gray, and some sort of dusty blend of gray over beige does no favors to what the Square team was trying to make here. Of course, there are some nice visual flourishes now and then. Mostly they're in Aki's dreams of the alien world, where there's actual color and strange geography. So obviously, these moments were used the most in marketing and are probably what you think of when you think of this movie if you've ever thought about this movie at all in the last 2 decades, and are what I'm trying to use the most to get people to actually look at the video I'm making and not click away from it. Don't stop the video yet, okay? Don't stop the video. So like, what actually happens in The Spirits Within? Well, it's mostly about our scientists and soldiers trying to piece together a bunch of spirits that will eliminate the phantoms when mixed into some sort of, I can't believe this is actually applicable, literal cosmic gumbo. Meanwhile, our stock evil character wants to use a giant laser to blow up the phantoms, which of course wreaks havoc on our hero's plans. And the majority of the runtime has our soldiers run around a bit, shoot at the aliens, have some freaky dreams, and become more and more desperate in their fight to stop the phantoms. But all of this is done in the most forgettable way possible. There's nothing all that unique about this world and the struggle or the characters. It's all just a stock post-apocalypse with a lot of shallow people that sort of just shoot at ghosts and get away in generic-looking vehicles and spaceships. The idea that this is all revolving around a spiritual world is interesting, but given that this was the reason why this story was made in the first place, it's disappointing that most of that just plays into the general threat of the aliens. That's probably the result of the finalized script being the product of rewrite after rewrite after rewrite, with 50 different iterations of the script in total, sanding down any original ideas and out-of-the-ordinary story elements into a very generic race to save what's left of the Earth. As for the Phantoms themselves, there's some interesting ideas hinted at during the film, but even their tragic origins are rushed over, as our heroes barely try to understand them at all. From the start, it's obvious that the alien life forms our humans are fighting are some sort of ghost. They're transparent, they're untouchable, they move through walls, they're skeletal, and they eat the souls of the living. And yet, apparently, no one has ever realized this in the years they fought them. They even call them phantoms. What's not to get? This is why the Earth's been destroyed. By the end, the realization of the Phantom's true nature, the combining of the spirits, our bad guy's self-destruction, and Gray's self-sacrifice to stop the Phantoms, saves what's left of the Earth and lets the world heal. You know, for a movie that's about the entire world being destroyed by Phantoms and the desperate fight to save the planet, The Spirits Within feels very small. A lot of this movie takes place in an underground base and then in a literal hole in the ground. I'm sure the massive amount of money needed to animate the film limited what was possible, but the lack of real adventure and interesting locations keeps the film from making you really feel the weight of its battle. There's actually very few characters here too, dwindling to just a couple by the end, although we should assume there are a lot more. They were just behind that door over there. Hey, character models and crowd shots ain't cheap. In the end, I don't think Final Fantasy The Spirits Within is a bad movie, just a very flawed one that doesn't really say anything new through its sci-fi concepts. It's really just a movie made in service to new technology, and when those innovations fall short, you're left with very little to hold on to. The characters are fine, but I couldn't really tell you what's unique about them. The romance between our leads isn't much, but Gray's sacrifice in the end and the bittersweet finale works pretty well. The human villain and the aliens don't have much going on besides being an obstacle, and the action feels pretty stiff. I've seen a lot worse, I've seen a lot better. It's an oddity, but not really one that ever needs real reclamation.
You've been trying to tell me that death isn't the end. Don't back out on me. Now that I finally believe.
So yeah, about this whole movie being a disaster that destroyed a studio, let's get back to that. Final Fantasy The Spirits Within cost $137 million to make, and would end up with a worldwide box office total of $85 million. When you factor in the cost of marketing and average out the split in ticket prices between movie theaters and the studio, by the way, everyone seems to forget this when talking about box office results, theaters don't give all their money to studios, people. Some have estimated The Spirits Within as actually losing Square somewhere between $80 to $95 million. That's one of the biggest bombs ever made. All the more devastating given both the time spent innovating technology for the movie and the sheer amount of hype created to promote this seemingly medium-changing event. So, with a bomb this big, what happened to everyone involved? Well, for starters, Aki Ross did not unfortunately become the next big movie star, and would go on to have a semi-recurring role in TNT's well-loved crime drama Rizzoli and Isles. Wait, I mean they just deleted the server data that had her. Physical media is very important, kids. And Square Pictures, founded to make a new world of stories for Square, was officially shut down by the end of 2001 due to what it called extraordinary losses that mounted to about $115 million. Although the studio and Remington Scott helped create footage for the CGI segment Final Flight of the Osiris for the Animatrix in 2001. Despite its failure, Spirits Within proved motion capture's viability, and Scott was soon hired by Peter Jackson to bring Andy Serkis as Gollum to life in The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers and The Return of the King. The success of Gollum on screen cemented motion capture's place in film, but it was The Spirits Within that made it possible, with Scott being a defining voice for its use on film for years afterward. What's happening now is that you're having a performance created completely unified, said Scott. You're recording your actor's body, face, voice, everything simultaneously right now. Hollywood didn't understand it or trust it, and it was not something you could get an A-list actor to come into a motion capture stage to do. However, the failure of the film and the financial blow of creating an entirely new movie studio that was almost immediately dissolved hit parent company Squareco Ltd hard. Square had been in the midst of merger negotiations with fellow video game producer Enix, but the film failure stalled talks until Square's Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts, a game that played a pivotal role in my youth, succeeded, leading to the official merger of the two companies on April 1st, 2003. Square was officially no more, and neither was the team that created The Spirits Within. And in its place, was Square Enix. As for Hironobu Sakaguchi, the man responsible for the creation of The Spirits Within, and who withdrew from game development to help bring the film to life, he resigned from Square in 2003 and spent the following 3 years at his home in Hawaii, demoralized and essentially doing nothing while grappling with depression from the major failure of the passion project that defined years of his life. Thankfully, Sakaguchi was able to move past his depression thanks to the support of Dragon Ball creator and the man that changed my middle school brain chemistry, Akira Toriyama, and artist Takehiko Inoue. In the years that followed, Sakaguchi founded video game company Mistwalker Corporation and developed several games, with the founder now in his 60s and possibly retiring from game development. The fallout from The Spirits Within was massive, but I think it's a case of developers pushing the envelope too far for what was possible at the time. Ambitious failures like Sakaguchi's film show us what's possible and what may still become reality one day. And now, nearly 25 years later, motion capture and fully CGI recreations of real people are a common occurrence in both animation and live-action film, either helping actors seamlessly do what's impossible in real life, or becoming an uncanny valley nightmare that big studios can't seem to stop using. If it was made just a few years later, The Spirits Within would probably have looked much better thanks to advancing technology and techniques, but it likely would have been lost in the shuffle of so many more animated films that use CGI as an everyday tool to make film. Square Enix, and Final Fantasy in particular, wasn't done making films. In 2005, the company and CGI animation studio Visual Works, which was founded to make video game cutscenes, released Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, a straight-to-video feature-length film sequel to the classic video game. And while Advent Children had a mixed reception, actually giving FF fans a story set in a world they loved was much more like what they had hoped for from a Final Fantasy movie, going on to sell more than 4 million copies. Despite Square's hopes and dreams being pinned on it only a few years earlier, Sakaguchi's film had effectively been erased from the public image of the franchise. As it stands, Final Fantasy The Spirits Within can absolutely be seen as a pioneer in the world of animation. But not every pioneer survives the journey. Thanks for watching today's video, and a video on a topic that may seem extremely out of the ordinary for the channel, and one that I really hadn't planned on covering until a few weeks ago. But as I was thinking about types of videos that I love to make, and making a video that would cover a lot of different interests that I have, I realized that Final Fantasy The Spirits Within sort of checks a lot of boxes for me. Movies that have years of struggle behind the scenes, failures that reshape studios, or close them in this case, major steps forward in animation, and video game history. Put them all together and you've got Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, a movie that has mostly been forgotten by everybody, including me, and I saw this in theaters many years ago when I was young. And I had not seen it since then until I did research for this video. And I watched it, and all of those thoughts that I had about how underwhelming and flawed and also interesting this whole movie was are in the video. And I remember very vividly going to see this movie at the time and thinking that I had never seen anything like it before, but also that it wasn't good. It was one of those movies I saw at a very early age that reminded me that movies can be bad. But I really enjoyed looking into the history of making this movie, and I hope that you enjoyed the ride through its history as well. If this movie had been a success, it would have been really interesting to see where Square Pictures would have gone, as well as Square overall as a company. Video game studios don't really move into making movies themselves. They usually hire out other studios to adapt their own work. So it was a big swing on Square's part, and they really put their money where their mouth was, especially by making a brand new movie studio in Hawaii. But it definitely did not work out. Box office bombs are always interesting to me. I don't like to gloat in the failure of a production, but it's fascinating to see where something went wrong and the many what-ifs behind those productions. And like I talked about in the video, The Spirits Within is a major trailblazer in the history of motion capture on film, but a trailblazer that did not survive the trailblazing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, whether you've seen it yourself or were inspired to watch this movie because of this video. It's a strange one, and it really doesn't hold up well after 20 years. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and taking a chance on an out-of-the-ordinary movie.